What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the seventh album by the rock band AC/DC. Basically, this album came out way back in 1980, the summer of 1980, and it's called Back in Black. Now, this was a massively successful rock album. Came out after Bon Scott died in early 1980, after they had just recently put out their 1979 album Highway to Hell. And they kind of, like the album title says, they came back with a vengeance, just because it might have been thought that AC/DC was kind of over, seeing as how skilled the lead vocalist Bon Scott was. And you kind of look after they had a new vocalist, which kind of similar to the stuff that happened with Black Sabbath and stuff in some of those moments. It kind of makes it questionable if they can do it. I mean, this seemed to happen throughout like the 70s and 80s with folks like, with Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and like AC/DC and some of these folks, that like something would happen, either a band member would leave or something would happen to them in terms of their death or something, and it just would kind of be questionable as to whether or not they could still do it. And this album is an example of where that did happen. And this is pretty much one of the best-selling albums of all time. It went 25 times platinum, which is unheard of in today's times. I mean, anything that's not like Paul McCartney or Adele or something like that is not really charting in that territory. But this is back in the vinyl days, when that was all there was before CDs and stuff. And this is back when you disliking one song off an album, you wound up buying the album and stuff. So that was kind of the thing. But probably the majority of that was made up from the 80s, but that's not to say that this is a weak album, because it definitely isn't. This is an excellent, probably one of the best rock and metal albums of all time. This is definitely going to get like a high score from me. I agree with the press and the public and the critics as far as trying to say that this is just a classic album. Very impactful. Definitely enjoyed it quite a bit. Has a number of songs that have just kind of crested throughout things and continue to be hits and highlights and that type of stuff. And I just would have to say, it's just an overall, this is a cosmetic design for how to do a rock album, especially if you want to take it back to classic rock of like the 80s and stuff. I just would have to say it has like a lot of good effectual moments, has some good substandard riffs on here. Definitely has some vintage riffs on here, some classic riffs similar to the stuff that Black Sabbath did with Iron Man and that type of stuff, and Ozzy Osbourne's Crazy Train. Some of those, like the title track on here, Back in Black, is a very distinct riff. Hell's Bells is pretty distinct. You Shook Me All Night Long is very distinct. So they had just a number of hits. This album almost has two songs on the album that hit 1 billion plays on Spotify. So it's definitely, I mean, if knowing that this album went 25 times platinum is not enough, it does have several multi-hundred million type songs on this project. And it's only 10 songs, so it's brief. This was a vinyl classic. This is definitely pretty much one of the oldest albums I can think of that I would have to say, in my opinion, as a classic. I mean, I need to learn more about some of these times from like the late 70s, early 80s, and mid 80s and stuff. I would have to say this is probably up there with like Metallica's The Black Album, in my opinion, that just did a lot of things right. So there were 4 singles off this project. The first single was You Shook Me All Night Long. And the first single was You Shook Me All Night Long. This is a pretty vintage, classic 80s rock kind of tune. This is definitely one that you'll continue to hear on 80s classic rock stations and that type of stuff. Just a vintage, state-of-the-art kind of rock song. Very lazy kind of tune in here. Kind of romantic a bit. Just a nice summer cut, just for a real simmering kind of day. Or you're just going to girlfriend's house, going to Bay's house, that type of stuff. Just kind of looking at the interest of it. Is very simplistic. I mean, a lot of this album just feels like this blue skies, not a single cloud in the sky kind of feel towards it. Just has a lot of this really 80-degree, 85-degree, 90-degree days that just, or it's hot out, you're wearing tank tops and ripped sleeve shirts and that type of stuff, and acid wash blue jeans. I mean, this is a pretty definitive 80s album. This is definitely a rock album for the summertime, and this is very definitive in being able to do that. And there's just a number of songs that just kind of have that energy that probably just hit every summer throughout the 80s and stuff, from 1980 probably all the way to like the 90s even, I would have to say. This just had a lot of staying power. You Shook Me All Night Long. This is very distinct, has a great chorus, definitely an arena rock kind of song. This has that not necessarily power battle, but just kind of an arena song that just can be played just on a local radio, backyard party, something. Just plenty of spots to kind of listen to. It's just an overall highlight. The second single is Hell's Bells. Now, this is a very excellent song. I really enjoy the riff. This probably has one of the best riffs on this album, especially that little stuff at the beginning where it just kind of does the intro and stuff. Very excellent, very haunting. This one's not quite entirely summer. I feel like this can be late summer to autumn in here. This really has like a spooky and kind of shrill kind of tone towards it. Very similar to the stuff that Ozzy Osbourne was doing. Very similar to stuff Ozzy Osbourne was doing in like the fall of 1980, early 1981. It's a very spooky kind of riff in here. Perfect little song title. This great topic. I would like to kind of get more of these like Nazareth and kind of gothic like metal songs because these are definitely pretty excellent. This is before Evanescence and like other bands like that. I can't think of them at the moment, but like, those type bands. Definitely kind of a business as usual kind of jam. This business as usual antics, just like another typical fun in the sun type day. Same stuff as usual, same mentality, same exert, that type of stuff as far as going about and just enjoying like the times. And just kind of is like a party bop. I could see this being played in night venues and just overall high kinetic kind of energy. The riff is just that good as far as that kind of goes. It's definitely, it can be a summer tune. It can be a summer tune. I see it as more of autumn, and it just definitely has that kind of night energy about it. It's really kind of classic rock staple. I mean, you can hear this a lot of times on just rock stations overall. It's just another highlight. The third single is Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution, and this came out, it seemed like it only came out in the UK. I mean, a song on United States radio, just not as much as like Hell's Bells, You Shook Me All Night Long, and Back in Black, but it is another highlight. It's probably the least favorite of like the four singles that they dropped from this, but it is a pretty nice one. Definitely one that I see sparks some kind of energy. It's just a kind of song that kind of gets for things getting ready to happen. This really has that kind of bop towards it. Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution is definitely a song that I see that gets things ready to happen, but it's just kind of more lazy and mellow compared to songs like Back in Black and Hell's Bells, where I feel like You Shook Me All Night Long is kind of more of the song that this is kind of more electric and more romanticized. Hell's Bells is kind of the manic, crazy one, and Back in Black's kind of like the signature lead single kind of staple that has the most summer energy, but I feel like Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution is kind of a more mellow and just kind of more relaxed. I mean, it still has a pretty decent riff in here, but it's just kind of like a shade or two less raucous and crazy than Back in Black kind of is. I just think that that's kind of the concept about it as far as that kind of goes. This nice energy. All four of the singles really do an excellent job. I mean, all of these minus Hell's Bells accomplish like getting these lazy summer days as far as that feeling kind of goes. That's just pretty good stuff for that. Definitely, it's probably one of the most crazy and just hypnotic albums out of the early 80s, I would have to say. I mean, this is really just like a tarnishingly good album. But I'm going to go ahead and recommend the 8.5 songs out of 10 I recommend to you. So basically, to shorten this, the only real song I don't recommend is just Shake a Leg. That's it. And I didn't like that song just because it didn't have really an interesting riff. It was just kind of mismanaged, and just kind of the arrangements of the song were not that attractive in how it wound up being. But every other song on here does excellent. Like, I really like the energy of Giving the Dog a Bone. This one's just a nice house party jam, very rowdy energy. It's very lively. I feel like Let Me Put My Love Into You is a real nice one. This is kind of like a more raucous version of You Shook Me All Night Long. Like, this has evening energy towards it. It's this very late malaise, kind of after responsibilities are kind of done. I just see that one as kind of one that you would listen to when work and things like that are done for the day, but you're kind of, it's not so much getting ready to get ramped up and excited. This is kind of more, unless you're getting ready to hit up Bay or something like that, it's just kind of more of a tune for getting ready to wind down as far as that kind of went. But I do like that kind of song. It's like a more edgy version of You Shook Me All Night Long. Definitely like the riff, and I definitely like Brian Johnson's vocals on this song. Shoot to Thrill is kind of like a more riveting version of Back in Black. Oh, I don't think I talked about Back in Black. Wait a second. Let's put that on rewind. Let's put this on rewind real quick. Before I get into the rest of the album cuts on this album, I got to talk about Back in Black. So we'll just kind of dissect some of those. You got a good taste of those, but also talk about the fourth single, Back in Black. This one's just an excellent kind of tune. This one is a real classic rock tune. It's probably one that you hear probably at least weekly. This is probably one that you hear at least weekly when it comes to classic rock and that type of stuff. Just an easy kind of oftenly played Just an easy kind of oftenly played rock tune as far as that kind of goes. Very hot and lazy summer day kind of energy. Just has a very distinct riff. Probably one of the most like distinct riffs in rock music for the past 40, 45 years or so. Just really has that continued energy. It's like Crazy Trains, like Iron Man, just like some of those continued classics as far as that kind of goes. Just really hits off. It just really hits the nail on the head. Has a great hook. This great energy. It's just a signature kind of. It's not the lead single, but it feels like it is just because of how well this song works. It's really like a heat wave kind of day where the energy is hot but not too hot. It's not quite as much of a scorcher as Hell's. Not quite as much of a scorcher as Hell's Bells is, and it's not quite as simmering as You Shook Me All Night Long. It's just kind of a hot day kind of tune towards it. Just definite. Could see this being played every day throughout the 80s as far as rock and metal kind of went. All right, now to talk about the rest of the songs that I recommend. Yeah, so talk about some more of these that I recommend. Shoot to Thrill is like a lighter version of Back in Black, not quite as hooky. I think you can hear this on classic rock radio often enough. I think this is another highlight. Most of this album continues to get plays pretty often. I just would have to say there's so many hits off this album. It's just seen in most people's eyes as a classic rock album, and Shoot the Thrill has the energy towards it. It's just a very jivey and busy kind of summer jam. It's about getting stuff done, but it's still fun at the same time. It's kind of a mixture between Hell's Bells and Back in Black, where it's kind of more manic than Back in Black, but not quite as crazy as Hell's Bells. But it does have some of that summer kind of workish, kind of busybody kind of energy towards it. Definitely like that one. It's a highlight. Good crazy chorus on there. And then to talk about the other two songs, like the thing about Have a Drink on Me and What Do You Do for Money, Honey, is they both kind of have like Have a Drink on Me is basically like a summer evening getting ready to pop off kind of song. It's very energizing. I definitely like the contentness of this song. It's just a nice kind of jam for this summer fun and going out and about and having some great times as far as that kind of goes. I definitely like the kineticness of how this one kind of works. Definitely a more energized version, or at least a relatively about the same energy as Shoot to Thrill and Giving the Dog a Bone. Not quite as crazy as Hell's Bells, Shoot to Thrill, and Giving the Dog a Bone, but just like a notch or two beneath it, but still has that relatively charming and just kind of affable, ramped up, kind of energized summer energy about it. I definitely like the concept of Have a Drink on Me. And then What Do You Do for Money, Honey? What Do You Do for Money, Honey has a decent riff on here. It's very similar to Back in Black, the title track, and Shoot to Thrill. It's just kind of a lesser version of that. It's the same type of approach of riff, but not quite as compelling of one. I feel like it has some summer energy on here, just not quite as biting. Similar to those, I feel like it's in the same vein. Pretty decent approach for how it handles, but it's just not quite as good. Like it's a similarity, and it's like got a mirroring approach towards it, but it just doesn't quite nail it quite as well. But I do feel like it's good enough. I mean, it's an almost song because I just am getting used to it, and maybe I can see myself liking it more down the road. But it just didn't quite. I mean, most of the songs, at least 8 songs off this album, jumped off the page and hit me like a ton of bricks. But I just would have to say this is one that was kind of like it's good, but not great, but good enough to still be a recommendation. And then the only real song, like I said, that I didn't recommend is just Shake a Leg. So me scoring this album is going to get a 10 out of 10. The social score will get a 10 out of 10 too. I feel like these songs were effectual, and especially out of 1980. I just cannot think of many other albums apart from like Michael Jackson's Thriller and Prince's Purple Rain out of like the early 80s from before 1985 or so that just hit this heavily. I mean, this is really good. Like Ozzy Osbourne's Blizzard of Oz was good, but this one upstages that, has 4 hit singles. This really kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, I need to review like their 1979 album Highway to Hell just to see how good Bon Scott was, but Brian Johnson did excellent with the vocals on this. He really came with a vengeance as far as being able to do it. The social score is good just because it has so many highlighted summer hits. Like there's some manic energy ones like Back in Black, Shoot to Thrill, Giving the Dog a Bone, and What Do You Do for Money, Honey? There's a real crazy kind of gothic one called Hell's Bells. It's very similar to Ozzy Osbourne. Couple songs for the ladies with Let Me Put My Love Into You and You Shook Me All Night Long. And then just some overall kind of stepping out kind of tunes like Have a Drink on Me and Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution. So there's just an overabundance of tracks on here that kind of have their festivities about it. 10 Social. In terms of the future, I know that AC/DC at least put out an album, I want to say in 2014 and possibly 2020. I mean, they don't drop all the time considering that they've been here since the 1970s, but they do have some relatively recent ones. I am going to have to think about reviewing Highway to Hell and maybe their 1981 album. I actually do own that album. I know it just pales in comparison to this album, but I want to see overall what I would go on to think of it and such. So